people walking and smoking and pushing their kid and riding bike, holding hands, milling about, getting videos. This is city life.
How do you negotiate cultural differences? How do you negotiate languages?
How to talk to each other, how to be interested in each other. How we're going to live together is the most important philosophical question of our time.
Global cities, or cities in general, have become a focus of attention. What happened that they suddenly became so important? Global cities is a term that was coined in order to describe various cities that serve as particular nodal points for processes of globalization.
Of course, globalization is everything, right? Socioeconomic ordering, gender issues, poverties of marginalization and success, changes in governance, changes in individual rights and freedoms.
The dissemination of capital, goods, commodities, persons, and images across national boundaries.
Ideas cross borders, and people cross borders, and money crosses borders.
And ideas can be cultural products. Hollywood movies, books that suddenly become kind of a must for every person, but also ideas such as democracy, or participation, or transparency.
Local governments and cities have exploded onto the international scene as actors with real power.
We see not just cities as suddenly capturing so much of the imagination and attention, but also other kind of cross-national and cross-border identities and all these groups that see themselves as operating in a transnational global world.
Universities have always been fundamentally very global because of the power of ideas. It draws professors from many distant areas. It draws students from many and distant areas. And the students then go on outside, and the ideas go on and are moved across the world.
I am from Iraq. I came to York 2 years ago.
I'm from Peterborough, right? So I grew up in Ontario.
I'm from India, and for now I'm doing here my PhD first year.
Where am I from? This is kind of a complicated question.
I've lived here my whole life. I was born and raised here, so definitely I love it.
I'm originally from Serbia, but I came here 15 years ago, and yeah, I've been living in Toronto since.
Universities are enormous nodes, if you will, for flows of people and ideas. And when one of those nodes is in a city, in a global city, you get this kind of mutual globalization force.
The point is that you need knowledge and information. That's why the university is at the center of this great transformation of our time. I grew up in Toronto, but it was a very different city in the early 60s when I was in my teens. It was a city which had 2 jazz clubs, a couple of pizza restaurants. Everything stopped at 11 o'clock.
It would be true to say that Toronto has changed much more over the last 50 years than most other cities in the world. 50 years ago, it was primarily English-speaking, white, and the biggest split was between Protestants and Catholics.
So people came in the 60s, and they began to transform Toronto. Somehow they found the resources to create jazz clubs or places where you can have folk music. Immigrants came with restaurants. They said, well, why can't you sit outside? What's wrong with Canadians? The Italians, they created the outdoor terrace. Canadians knew about this, right, when they traveled abroad, but they never thought to bring it home. But the immigrant came and said, this is our home, we will make it better.
The people here are so friendly. I don't miss my home at all. Like, I feel like at home here.
You can find everything. Food is variety of food. You find Chinese food, Arabic food, Western food, German food, I don't know. You find this is part of Toronto variety.
It's a great city, you know, lots of different people. Everything you want to do.
The city is filled with different people that you can communicate, you can find your space and place as well as your right here.
I love this city. I don't want to leave this. So that's why we applied for Canadian permanent residency, and I'm a permanent resident now.
The city I knew did not include York University.
There's the famous picture of Murray Ross, the new president, sitting at his desk with a vacant field around him. This is the new university.
Why did the Anglo-Saxon elite choose this farm of 650 acres or 700 acres, flat, uninteresting, far from everywhere, not properly linked to the city?
Actually, York's evolution parallels very well the evolution of the city of Toronto over the last 50 years.
York, to me, when I first came, was just like a big maze. I got lost with the roads going around and around. You just miss your cutoff, and you're going around again.
I came here to do graduate work in 1976. You know, the only place that you could go out for a beer with your fellow grad students was the grad pub on the 7th floor, I think, of the Ross building. And there was this great vista of huge oil tanks, and that's all you could see.
The origins of the university lie not only in that physical structure, but also in Murray Ross's determination to create interdisciplinary work at the university. You need to have some understanding of how other people's worlds operate.
York is very much part of the new Toronto, part of the suburbanization of this city.
We grew to reflect the growth of Toronto.
There was the Ross building and about 2 other buildings, and then the graduate student residences that we used to call Kafka Heights. I don't know if people still call them that.
It was like far for people to come out here.
I arrived at York with a fairly long-standing interest in urban planning. And one of the things that quickly became clear was how much York's fate was tied up with its physical distance from the rest of the city, its isolation both physically and intellectually from the rest of the city. We tried to think of ways to get people here using buses and carpooling. We, for the first time, looked at possibly developing some of the university lands so that we could grow our own community.
When I was at York, the stunning thing Harry did in master planning was to knock down the ramp.
We used to say, oh, the corpses of students past can be found if you dig in that ramp. You know, there really wasn't any purpose that that ramp, you know, might have served.
You could not construct a master plan if all it was building around the mistakes of the past. You had to invest in undoing things before you could do them.
It took a long time for the place to be kind of filled in, both in the sense of newer and more aesthetic and welcoming kinds of buildings, and also in terms of a community of people who live around it.
It looks like something out of an Orwellian future city or something.
This is kind of an island, you know?
It's all cement, and it's not like U of T where they got the vines and you think you're in Oxford and, you know.
The thing is, like, you find a community here, like in your program or in your college.
There's never a time when I walk across York campus and don't run into people I know, right? You know, you sort of just end up sort of hanging around the college, especially when the winter's cold. We're sort of driven to the same places indoors. Now it's just like hilarious, like see people on the commons, like splashing around in the pond and or like just like napping underneath the trees.
I think universities continue to play a role in the evolution of every urban environment where they sit.
When I came here, what was so noticeable to me was that no one knew where we were. The way you described where you were was to tell someone, you know where Sam's is? Well, we're behind it. And I didn't want to be behind anything. I wanted to be in front of things. Because I have a healthy ego and a bit of an edginess to me, I decided, well, I know how I'll fix that. I'll buy Sam's. And then when I saw Yonge Street, I thought to myself, this is the ugliest mess of stuff I've ever seen. And I thought, why not just tell people what you think of it and not have Toronto just sit around thinking that part of the most important stretch of city in Canada needs to be ugly? Why doesn't someone speak out about these things? So it was so obvious to me that building our campus was building the city of Toronto. And when the City of Toronto built, they were building our campus.
Universities don't sit in some abstract ivory tower. They're part of communities.
Public space has always been crucial to student thought, I think. It goes hand in hand, the space of debate, the space of exchange.
There's a dialectic. The urban environment shapes the culture, the evolution, and the character of every university.
We live in a period of great engagement, right? People talk to each other. They want to persuade each other to act together for the environment, for anti-racism, for 100 different issues.
A good public space is always about feeling comfortable in a situation where one can have a conversation, one can engage, one can discuss, one can test out.
I meet people on the street, just go for a walk, run into someone I hadn't seen for a while, talk for 2 minutes, move on.
I mean, we are public creatures by nature, and we all, to be cosmopolitan is to sort of enjoy engaging with strangers in a lot of ways, and public spaces tend to allow that to happen.
Maybe the great cities are places of anonymity, but there's also places where actually your lineage of living there connects you with others in unpredictable ways.
Because of the heightened tensions between cultures and classes and nations and languages and visions of the world, how do you enable conflicts and disagreements and discord in an environment without it being full-blown violent disruption or struggle? Cities serve as really great laboratories for examining a lot of those questions, kind of a learning environment for mediating and negotiating cultural, linguistic, profound differences.
In Toronto, people always like to say, oh, we're so diverse, isn't it great? Well, yes, it's good that it's diverse, but immigration in such numbers does pose challenges.
Who is actually the owner of the city?
Ze światła poczęte moje miasto, z deszczu wyrzęte moje miasto, ze światła poczęte moje miasto, z deszczu wyrzęte moje miasto. Z puzli domów, samochodów i wind, mieszkańców, mentów, przekrętów, psów, sklepów, dyskotek i kin, szpitali, cmentarzy i gliniarzy. Moje miasto we mgle ginące, w słońcu się rozciągające. Moje miasto martwe w nocy, o świcie tramwajami rozwożące znowu życie. Ze światła poczęte moje miasto, z deszczu wyrzęte moje miasto, ze światła poczęte moje miasto, z deszczu wyrzęte moje miasto.
The university, through its history, has become a real catalyst and contributor to diversity.
Whenever there's a huge upset somewhere in the world, within 2 years, students from there will be in my classes at York. Doesn't matter whether it was the Vietnamese boat people or the Rwandan genocide, of the collapse of the Soviet Union. Within 2 years, families from those areas will have moved to Toronto, and some of their children will be in my classes at York University.
You take a course with someone who's gay, or someone who's transsexual, or someone who's from India, or someone's from Africa.
All those kids are suddenly learning in the same classroom.
It's an amazingly diverse slice of the world in one place.
You form all these relationships when you study together, when you have bad professors together, you have to cope with them. When you have terrific professors, that's the experience. So the university, I think, is very important beyond the certification, beyond the kind of its ideological function as part of, you know, the apparatus of society.
When you're from like the inner city and stuff, you're not really given like opportunities to have people come and talk to you in like the high school environment and say, you know what, you can go to university, here's the guidance, this is what you have to do. And I never had that.
I'm from a smaller community, right? So I never thought or imagined that I was going to meet the people that I did. Like, you know, the people that you meet in a university, especially a larger one like this, it just sort of, it blows your mind and it blows your little worldview apart.
Just a lot of great people here that you're able to experience, meet, learn new things, because there's such a diversity of people at York.
And my parents can't really speak English that well, et cetera, so they didn't really place emphasis on education. So I had to kind of guide myself and find like a path for myself, which was very difficult to do, but I did.
There's so many students with so many different backgrounds, and you interact with them in classes, and they have, you know, having a class discussion is a perfect example of how people think so differently.
I'm older than some of the people in my class, but I'm okay with it. I mean, you have to start somewhere, right?
After this, you don't make so many assumptions, and you just sort of get to know sort of where you fit a little bit more. And I think that's been probably the most valuable part about going to a really big university like York.
Okay, this is our institution. We want to think about it in real terms, right? Not as an abstraction, but who is the community?
Have the people who have graduated from these programs, have the professors in these programs been active contributors to democratic life?
Are you, in fact, taking full advantage of your privileged position to investigate the issues that need to be investigated?
To understand where knowledge is headed, where the gaps are, where the conflicts are.
Important world events, we need to understand them, debate them, look at them, think about them.
As we evolve as society and as the knowledge society evolves, we need to have ways to deploy knowledge very quickly. Traditionally, universities have been the source of knowledge transfer through its own graduates.
Our capacity to develop intellectual projects, our capacity to enrich the communal life of our faculty and students.
Research centers, research groups, new groupings come together.
Our capacity to perform fully our civic functions.
As the world of knowledge changes and as boundaries of knowledge change.
Our capacity to contribute culturally through architecture, through events that are available to the community, theater, dance, art exhibits.
Democratic life needs universities.
I think we need a new model of a global university, which is not based on the notion of globalizing property rights, but is based on, for example, globalizing the notion of justice. What would a global university like that look like?
The city produces a particular kind of knowledge that's immediate and concrete. And the university is better at producing more abstract kinds of knowledge. If there's a strong communication between the city and the university, then the university becomes very interested in the kinds of issues that the city's facing. And that is very important because those are not just city issues, they're also world issues.
They're both big, sprawling, complicated places, and your experience is personal, but it's also very collective.
Gay Pride, 1 million people. Caravana, 1 million people. The Toronto Film Festival, hundreds of thousands of entries.
To have a little bit of an accent is okay.
So you have to define yourself. You have to sort of carve out both space and identity and purpose It's not a place on the internet, it's reality. And you meet people, and you go for coffee, and you go dancing, and you fall in love, and everything happens, right? It gives you the freedom to be yourself.